Hello YouTube, and welcome back to part 2 of our look at Citroen 2CV suspension. As you've seen in the first video, which hopefully you've looked at, we went through how to take them off and put them back on the car. Now we need to look at how they're made, each individual component part, where they go wrong, what you can do to rectify that, most of which is fairly straightforward, hopefully. So I intend taking apart this can, which is a low mileage, late model Portuguese built can. I think it's only done about 30,000 miles. And it's showing quite a lot of problems, believe me. So we're going to take this apart so you can see what they look like originally, what they look like as a genuine factory part. And then we'll put it back together. And then we'll take apart the ones that were on my car, which, as you've seen, were a problem. And we need to find out why they were a problem and address that problem if at all possible, which will hopefully stop other people ending up with the same problem. So the obvious thing to do, I think, is to look at the constituent parts first of all, work out what they're meant to do, work out if they're still capable of doing it, and then how we're going to rectify it. So I'll bring you in and we'll go through it bit by bit and see what we find. So let's do that. So starting with the front end, the cans should be marked AV for front. Can't find it on this one, but somebody's helpfully scratched F on it anyway, and also you can measure the rods, and the long one goes to the back, short one to the front, so I know this is the front. So the first problem is our tie rod ends. Now, I don't know if you can see, but this one has a clear notch there, which is where the knife edge pin has worn itself a little hole, a little groove. Now, that's relatively mild. However, it won't help the movement of your suspension. It will be slightly notchy because that is there. When it becomes deeper, and I'll see if I can find one that's deeper in a second to show you, it can severely weaken the eye, and also if it is really stuck in there and not moving properly, it applies bending forces to the rod rather than smoothly pivoting. So any sign of wear on these, and you need to change them. Now, each one of those, like you refer to my little piece of paper, the latest price I've got on these, and this is May 2020 I'm talking, the end eyes are £17.75 each. And the ones I've seen for sale at the minute look like this, which is the later type. You may sometimes find them fitted with this, which is the earlier type, which is slightly shorter. Not a problem because it can be adjusted out. They function perfectly well. Both eyes function perfectly well. These are stronger because they're a chunkier construction than these, but these do work. In fact, I believe that some of the reconstructed new suspension cans you can buy in France actually come with these on them, or they did. So, when you've got ridging like this, you'll probably find that your pivot pin is also worn. Obviously that is a bad combination. So a new pin is £4.95. They're different front to back. The back ones are a couple of millimetres thicker, if I remember rightly. I'm pretty certain they are. Look it up. I'm pretty certain they are. So let me just find you a more worn eye and then we'll take this off. Right, I've looked at all the other suspension tubes and amazingly none of them have got worn eyes, or at least no more worn than that. So you've got to take my word for it that they do end up quite noticeably V'd. So just something to watch out for. So to get the rod off, like we did in the first video but underneath the car, we use our little tool, which I picked up the wrong spanner for, so let me go and get the right spanner. Right, I've no idea where I put the right spanner. I put it down a minute ago, it's gone. That's the problem of being a silly old git, you forget where everything is. Right, so, is this going to move? Yes. Oh, wow, that's tight. Right. As you can see, things are rather rusty. Not uncommon. Right, so now, if you were just fitting a new eye and leaving everything else as it was, which is unlikely, but if you were, you can measure where it sat in relation to the exposed thread. You can take a measurement from the collar. You take a measurement from the collar to where it sat. Anything that will give you an initial position which you can then use when you're setting up the car regards suspension height and things. So the other thing, as I'll show you when all this is clean, is that there will still be a witness mark regardless. No matter how well you clean it, you will still be able to see where that was sitting. But anyway, we'll come to that later. So the next issue, once I move our suspension forward a little bit, is our rubber boot. Should be in sight clearly now, I hope. Now these obviously split, like that in fact. Now a new boot, referring to my little piece of paper, costs about, I don't know because I haven't written it down. Oh, how ridiculous. Right, anyway, they're about £4.20 roughly. And as you can see, they're very often damaged. So they have to come off there. If it's undamaged, you can turn it inside out and get a pull over that. Clean that first. Wire brush it to get it clean. Turn the boot inside out and pull like so, and that'll get it off. If the boot is undamaged. Otherwise, there's not much point refitting something like that, is there? That's straight in the bin. Right, we then have our sleeve. That nut was the one that didn't move. You have to undo the inside one to get this off. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but somebody has gripped this one with the pliers, something like that, to hold it whilst they undid that nut, which they have chiselled, as you can possibly see there, to get it off. So that isn't necessarily a problem. We shall discuss this in more length in a minute. So the nut definitely will have to go. You can't refit something like that. New nuts are readily available. They're not cheap because they're big. They're about £4.50. But because somebody has chiselled that, that's useless. Don't even think about using it, bin it. So that joins the rubber boot. Now, you can see where the suspension cylinder has been sitting inside the sleeve of the end cap. That's rusty, but I've seen them considerably worse. Now, I'm going to put this in a bucket of acetic acid solution, which is very cheap, easy to make, and I'll do that in a minute. I'll show you all that process in a minute. So we'll put this to one side for the moment. If this was really damaged all round or badly rotten, which they are quite often, a new sleeve is £17.50. So the money's mounting up. I mean, you've got 4 sleeves. I think you can buy a whole mounting kit for one side for about £77, which gives you a rough idea of why it's worth trying to save as much of this as we possibly can. So we'll be moving on to that again in a minute somewhere else. But for the moment, we'll continue stripping our tube. Then comes your rubber bung, which quite often comes apart. I don't think it's really meant to. I think that's meant to be crimped over so it doesn't come apart. They're quite often distorted from where they've been seized. That has been seized onto there. And therefore people put chisels down between them to free them off. Again, ultimately, that doesn't necessarily stop it being reused. It's not good practice. Depends how skint you are and how badly distorted it is. This one's not too bad. Anyway, a new one of those is, let me check, bump stop, £13.95. And then we come to something that's rather more of a problem. And I'm going to have to move the camera again and relight this because you want to see this in all its horror. Right, so there is a felt ring which sits inside a raised element there, which you can just see has rotted off, this one. Now you can buy new felt rings, they're about £1.50. They're quite often missing. Now this end cap is completely useless. As you can see, it's rotted away. It's actually bent there, distorted. It's starting to collapse with the rust swelling it out. Nasty, nasty. So we now know that this can is unusable in its current condition. But what we're going to do is we're going to grind off round here where it's been welded at the factory, release this cup and then disassemble the whole shebang. But before we do that, we need to strip the other end. Now I won't show you all of that because you've just seen it, and frankly I don't want to waste your time. I'm sure you've got other things to do. However, this end, the nut is still free-ish. Yep. There are no signs of the threaded bar having been grabbed by pliers. And as I say, we will try and save that other one. We're not going to give up on it yet. It's also considerably less rusty at the back end because it's a bit more protected. It's cleaner inside the tube. The end cap isn't bent. The rubber's separated, but we'll deal with that later. So I would say all those components so far, including the rubber boot, which isn't split, everything is reusable, including the eye, which has got no marking. I'll clean it off and show you that later. And this end cap still has its felt seal in place in there. Let me just point to it inside that lip there. That can be picked out. So I shall do that now, if you bear with me 1 second. That can be picked out carefully. Oh, so it can. Doesn't want to actually come out. No. Normally, oh, there we go. I was going to say normally it doesn't take that much effort. There we go. There we are. Even that's not in that bad condition, to be honest. It's nice and soft. But I mean, for the sake of £1 odd, you're going to change it, aren't you? But that could probably be reused, to be honest. Right, and the end cap is good. Is that rust? No, that's pretty good. Yep, that's pretty good. So I'll strip these bits off. I'll show you the what we're going to do with the metal bits, and then bring you back and we'll open the can. Right, citric acid isn't very keen on oil and grease. It loves rust, it doesn't like oil and grease. So this is from a Hyper Clean in my tank. This is my favoured degreaser. I've always found it works really well. I've got no connection to Comma other than being a satisfied user. So I just want to get rid of as much grease as I can to begin with. The eyes are particularly greasy from having the knife edges done. Right, that's all it needs, because we're now going to move on to the grinder. Right, with the grease off, this is the rustiest piece. I'm just going to give it a light. I like going over on the wire wheel on the bench grinder. And doing that has revealed that where the threads are just completely been eaten away by rust. So now we know that it isn't worth even contemplating using that. So something else for the rubbish bin. So we'll just clean the eyes up and have a closer look at that. So that's the one you saw earlier. It has a very light notch. Very light notch. And the back one has virtually nothing. So I would be happy reusing that one. Not so much that one, I really wouldn't bother. I suppose you could carry it as an emergency spare. I don't know. I probably will, because I often go into odd places with my 2CV, well away from anyone that's likely to have bits. But anyway, that's just me. It's probably not worth keeping. That one is, so that's going to be cleaned and reused. Now a less rusty one. Isn't perfect, but the threads are all there. I'll clean that up and run a nut down it just to make sure. And then our end plates. See, that one's starting to distort because of the rust underneath it. I will clean the rust off it. I'm going to wipe them down, and it's going to go into citric acid now, which I'll show you. It may be possible that can be cleaned out and reflattened. Is it worth it? Probably not, but we shall do it anyway and see what it looks like. So we now have a collection of bits that need to be wiped down with a cloth, which I'll have to go look for, so I'll bring you back in 1 second. Right, this scummy bucket contains my solution of citric acid, which has been used many times so far, but it's still working. Now it's at about 10 to 1 mix, approximately, maybe slightly less than that, maybe slightly weaker than that. Citric acid is cheap, you can buy it in bulk, very cheap if you buy big bags of it, very cheap indeed. Smaller bags cost obviously proportionately more. So this is the one that's too rusty to be used, but it's going in as a control piece so you can see what happens. That's the one that I think is good enough to be used. And then we have our good eye, our 2 metal end brackets and a nut, and they will sit there. In fact, I might as well stick the other end in as well and let it. They will sit there now, just like that, untouched for a couple of days, and then I'll show you what they look like when they come back out. But previously I found it to be an extremely effective way of getting rid of rust. Very cheap, very slow, admittedly, but very effective, and hopefully we will see that. So I'm going to turn you off again, and I'm going to look at the end of this can. Right, so as I mentioned earlier, this end can is welded to the tube part along that circumference, welded by the factory. And we've got to grind that down now until we can see where this joins this clearly, which is easier to show you than try and explain any further. So I'm using a linishing disc, very rough grit linishing disc on my angle grinder, and I'm just going to work my way around the pipe tube, and I'll bring you back when we get to the point where you can see the difference between the two. So I'll just show you a quick burst and turn you off, because really it's spectacularly dull watching someone just grind a piece of metal. Oh, the rest of the video might be spectacularly dull, I don't know, but even worse watching someone grind a piece of metal. So I'll just start you off and give you an idea. Right, after quite a bit of welding, you will start to see where the join. I've moved to macro lens now. You should just see when that there is the cap and that there is the outside of the can. And you'll start to see this line appearing. And that's what we want to see all the way around. Because once you see that line, you know the last of the weld is gone, and we can have a go at pulling it off. So that's what we're looking for, and that's what we're going to get. Right, much grinding. We had our thin line all the way round. Ow, hot. Let's give it a go. That's successful. Right. Oh, that's a slow process, but we're there. Right, so that's our end cap, which I'm not going to touch because it's still very hot. So then we have our coil spring. Note the direction of spring. And then, we have our cap, which is covered with friction material. Let me just bring you in closer and show you that. Right, our friction material, which is riveted onto this cup, and in the tie rod is cupped like that, which just sits inside there. That sits inside the spring, and a whole lot moves up and down inside the tube. So let me degrease all those items, and we'll have a closer look at them. But before we look at the individual components at the front, I mentioned that the back can end was fine. and I intended reusing it. So we can remove all the components for the back without disturbing that end at all. That way we only need one cup. Again, note the direction of the springs. We'll go into more detail on that when we put it together. But for the moment, just notice the way they slope. So there's the back. And we'll wash them up. Right, so the front components have been cleaned up. As I said before, these items are all from a car that's on less than 20,000 miles, a left-hand drive car that was accident damaged. So really, these are pretty much, as you'd expect, almost unworn, loads and loads of material over the rivets. That eventually wears down just like brake shoes, and you can't actually find a figure at the minute. But these have got loads of meat on them, and they were tight in the tube, so they're not worn. You can buy the material just as a material and have them re-riveted if you need to. You can also buy replacement ones at varying price points, and we will talk about that more when we open my cans, because that is where the issue, I'm sure, lies with my cans, and I'll show you what I've got in mind and why they're a problem. So that's fine. The other thing that can wear is this end becomes mushroomed and can split in extremis. Absolutely fine. Normal signs of wear, nothing drastic there at all. The spring height is a measurement in the factory manual of 193, I think 193 millimeters, is that right? Anyway, whatever. Again, there's no reason to suspect this to be badly worn. The paint isn't even worn off the end of the springs. And a quick check with a tape measure, which is by far from my ideal method of doing it, but that's what I've got to hand at the minute. And it came up as, I think, 191 on my tape measure. So even if it has shrunk 2 millimeters as a percentage, that's a tiny amount of shrinkage. So I'm more than happy to reuse these again. There's still some muck on the inside of these which I've missed. And then the rod, the threads are perfect, absolutely unmarked. And the rod itself is pretty straight. There's a very, very slight kick up at one point, but to all intents and purposes it's straight. And then the cup, because this wears as well, that sits in there obviously. You sometimes get scuff and tear marks on the face of the cup, but again, the paint's still on it, so there's nothing wrong with that. So the front components are all absolutely fine and will all be reused. So let's have a look at the rears. Spring, which is shorter than the front. I think the manual said 170 milli for this. Again, there isn't even any paint loss. And this came up roughly right. Again, I don't have anything sufficiently accurate to measure it that close. I went by tape measure again. The worst thing on this one is there is a slight paint loss there on the edge of that coil, which is something and nothing really. Our cup, again, undamaged end, loads and loads of meat over the friction material. I have no hesitation in reusing that at all. And then our rod, I haven't cleaned up yet, so you're going to have to bear with me 1 second while I clean it up. Right, just like the front, the threads are fine, I did mention that you could always see wear marks, witness marks. This is a case in point. In fact, I'll get the macro lens out and show you that in a second, just so you know what I'm rabbiting on about rather than just vaguely pointing at things. But the thread's fine, cup end's fine, no damage, paint's still on it, and like the front, it's a pretty good roll. Now, sometimes these are bent. I think probably due to wear at the knife edges, like we talked about before, where there's a bending action applied to them when they become very worn, possibly for other reasons. But you can, when you find the high spot, as you roll it, it will lift and drop. When you get the high spot, if you just press it back into shape, that works remarkably well. You'll never get it completely bang on straight, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, that's pretty close. And so don't panic if your rod looks a bit out of shape. You can pull it back quite well. Right, so let me put the macro lens on and I'll just show you what I was wittering on about witness marks. If you look at the threads up to about there, they're quite clean. And past there, although they've been cleaned, you can just see on the edge of them, of each thread, there are little nicks, little marks, little imperfections all the way down. So though superficially it all looks the same when you glance at it, there are differences. So if you look closely, between there and there, you'll see the difference. Now, the reason I mention that is, having stripped it all down, when you put it back on the car, to get your rough initial height, you just have to wind your your tie rod end eye onto where that starts at each end, and then mount it, and you have a rough position from where it came off before you fine tune. So it's an easy starting point for when you're setting your heights again, having dismantled everything to this stage and put it back together again. It gives you a chance of finding out where things should be, and then you can fine tune it from there. So just thought I'd mention it. Maybe of interest, it may not, who knows. Sort of thing that I like, but there you go. Right, the final bit to clean was our suspension cylinder itself. Now that all the crud's off it, I hope you can see there A, V together, as it's like a slanting N with a bar across the A. I hope you can see that. We've got your factory runs from when it was painted, and then a bit of rust at the bottom end. So I could remove all of that, paint it gloss black, but I'm not going to bother, because given where it is, I'll be soaking it in wax oil anyway. So I'll just remove the rust, kill it, and then lightly coat it with a wax oil soaked underseal, which is similar to the coating it will have originally after it's painted. And importantly, I've cleaned all the inside, so it's absolutely spotless. We're back to pure steel. It's in excellent condition. These can rot through because, as you can see, they're very thin steel, really. They are a cover more than anything else. In fact, the factory did try to do without them in the 50s, when some cars with the resorts apparent or visible springs were made in France, some in Forest in Belgium, and a couple of cars even went to America with the resorts apparent on, because I've seen one. So yeah, so really it is just a cover. You could throw that away and the system would still work with the springs exposed. it just wouldn't be as controlled. But anyway, so I need to clean off the rust, kill it, and then in the next video we'll put it all back together.